Everybody, welcome to Paul Boygreen Eston Jr.'s YouTube page. We've got a very special guest, of course, former D1 quarterback Jordan Reid, senior NFL draft analyst for the Draft Network as well, joining us here on YouTube. Jordan, thanks for taking the time, man.
No problem, Paul. It's a pleasure being here. I always enjoy our talks.
Yeah, well, man, let's jump right into this. A lot of New York Jet fans are feeling down because the Trevor Lawrence thing isn't happening anymore. It's a realization that we all have to come to. And I think the first thing here that Jet fans now have to struggle with the next step of Trevor Lawrence no longer being a part of the picture here for the Jets is what do you do with Sam Darnold? Because he's shown flashes that maybe he could be something for this organization, but there's also been a lot of red flags. So I'm going to put you in the hot seat here, Jordan. If you were making the decisions, you're Joe Douglas, you're sitting there in the cockpit. What do you do? Do you build around Sam with the number 2 overall pick and all the assets they have, or do you just hit the reset button and bring in a new quarterback?
Well, if it were me and if I were in Joe Douglas's shoes, I honestly would hit the reset button. And I think the biggest reason why is the biggest key to roster building, or I think the most dangerous weapon to roster building, is having a rookie quarterback on a short term, not a short term deal, but a cheap deal. And the Seattle Seahawks in 2012 really made the blueprint of this with Russell Wilson and how they were able to construct that roster and what should have been a dynasty. But we know what happened with the Malcolm Butler situation. But in a Jet situation, I think with Joe Douglas not having any ties to Sam Darnold, meaning that he wasn't the guy that was responsible for drafting him, maybe he wants to create that similar blueprint as far as getting that guy, that headliner quarterback at the top of the draft to really stamp this rebuild. And I really like what the Jets have done, especially in last year's draft. I think the more that they have played these players and then those guys getting healthy, I think they've shown promise, whether it's a LaMichael P. Ryan, who showed some flashes when they weren't giving Frank Gore a bulk of the reps. We've seen what Denzel Mims has been capable of when he had came back from the injury. And then even the punter and Brandon Mann, that seems to be a big hit in the 6th round last year. So they have plenty of others. Aston Davis was another. And then we all know what Mekhi Becton has done. He looks to be really the face of the franchise player right now at the left tackle spot. So I really like what Joe Douglas has done in his first draft ever with the Jets. Now it's just a matter of them adding those premium position players. I think that's the technique that he should go through with this year's draft class, especially having 2 first-round picks. I think whether it's a quarterback, a cornerback, an edge rusher, or even another offensive tackle, I think those are the 4 premium positions that you have to address with both of those first-round picks, I should say. But concerning Sam Darnold, I would take a quarterback and then try to shop Sam somewhere, just because you have to make a huge decision on his 5th-year option. And I just don't know if he's going to be worth that type of money when I can have a Zach Wilson or a Justin Fields on a 4 to 5 year deal while still constructing this roster.
All right, let's look at some of the quarterbacks. The first one I want to get to is Justin Fields. And this goes back to an article you wrote, and I'm sure you remember it. It's gotten a lot of pub. It was back in November. And the line from there that I keep hearing, it's like almost ever since Trevor Lawrence has no longer become a possibility for the Jets, in the middle of the night, I wake up and I'm like, it's this. It's you talk about scouting the player and not the helmet. Now that's a poppy line. I hear it and it pops. But then I'm like, man, it's hard to put into effect because, when I look at Ohio State, and you did a great job in your article, people could check it out on the Draft Network. We'll also have it in the YouTube description down below. You look at Troy Smith. You look at some of these other quarterbacks that have come through for Ohio State that have been swings and misses. How is Justin Fields different from those guys? And also, can you explain that line a little bit and kind of how you came to it of, again, scouting the player and not the helmet?
So the most prime or most recent example was Patrick Mahomes. And I said Patrick Mahomes just because not even just Texas Tech, but Big 12 quarterbacks in general, we know they haven't really panned out really well in the league. And USC wide receivers is another great example of a position group with a similar school that just hasn't had success on the NFL level. But recently, USC receivers have had a lot of success in the league. And I know Juju Smith-Schuster hasn't had a great year overall, but we've seen plenty of other examples in years past with USC receivers really debunking that myth that happened with them, whether it was a Mike Williams coming out many years ago and then some of the other receivers that happened to just not pan out in the league. But I like using the Texas Tech and Patrick Mahomes example just because Mahomes wasn't really a winner at Texas Tech. I think he finished with like a 5-7 record coming out his last year. And there was just so many raw aspects to his game. And then he just put up video game like numbers in that conference there, just because we know with the Big 12 offenses, they're just known for throwing the ball all over the place. And it's really just whoever has the ball last and scores a touchdown, that's who's going to win games in the Big 12. And that's what happened with Patrick Mahomes. And a lot of people really dismissed him because of that. And I think that was a big reason why so many people missed on Patrick Mahomes. And let's just be honest, nobody knew besides the Kansas City Chiefs that he was going to end up panning out the way that he has, turning into basically a generational type of talent. But it's a great lesson of just, you have to scout this. You have to be able to differentiate the traits from the jersey or the helmet logo that they're wearing, just because everybody is their own entity and everybody deserves their own individual assessment of their skills. And I think Justin Fields is another prime example of, you have to really scout the player and not just the helmet logo. And I know Ohio State has plenty of examples of quarterbacks that just hasn't panned out. And we saw a most recent example with Dwayne Haskins, of where he's just been in a downward spiral ever since he's been drafted, pretty much, in a sense. But with Justin Fields, he's much more mature in a lot of different aspects, not just from an on the field standpoint, but off the field as a leader. We saw everything that he was doing while we didn't even know if we were going to get college football this year with the COVID-19 situation. He's been a multi-time team captain, even though he's been a younger player on the Ohio State roster. And then just some of the aspects that he's been able to accomplish on the field as well. And yes, he hasn't played well this year against Northwestern in the Big 12 or Big 10 championship. He wasn't very good. And then Indiana, he wasn't very good either. But I think something that a lot of people really dismiss and forget about him is that he's only a second-year starter. This is only his second year playing in that Ohio State offense. I don't really count his first year at Georgia just because he was just a wildcat quarterback, and they just used him in that sense of just running the football. But last year, it was his first year as a starter. He put up terrific numbers. I think it was 41 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. And then a bunch of those interceptions came down the backstretch of last year. But this year, you're really starting to see some of the flaws that's coming into his game. And I just have to remind people that this is only his second year as a starter. And similar to Trevor Lawrence, who didn't play well down the backstretch in the college football playoff, I don't think he played well. Justin Fields is going to have those same bumps in the roads that Trevor Lawrence had. And Trevor's been a 3-year starter compared to Justin, who's only been a 2-year starter. So there's going to be some bumps on the roads. We see it with every single quarterback prospect. Now, I will say this about Justin Fields, as far as what he has riding on the college football playoff, I don't think there's a more important, as far as resume building type of games for any prospect in the country that's playing in the college football playoff than Justin Fields. And I think this game upcoming against Clemson is going to be huge for his draft stock.
How big of a drop-off is there? Because that's what Jet fans, a part of what they want to know here, and especially since some of the struggles you mentioned with Fields, there's been some questions on who really is QB2 in this class. Perhaps that's TBD. Maybe that Clemson game will help solidify that in a lot of respects. But how big of a drop-off is there from Trevor Lawrence to Justin Fields and every other quarterback, quite frankly, in this draft class?
It's significant. I'm not going to sit here and lie and
try to get your hopes up.
I was hoping you'd say, no big drop-off at all, Jet fan.
Trevor's a special talent.
And I mean, we've seen the hype ever since the 2018 recruiting class cycle when he was coming out of high school, him and Fields, when they were battling back and forth to be the number 1 overall prospect in that class. But I think Lawrence is just in a different stratosphere from any other prospect in the country, quarterback prospect in the country. But when you're talking about that second tier, I think it's going to go back and forth between Justin Fields and Zach Wilson, a player that you're starting to see creep up a little bit, maybe possibly into that QB2 spot with the way he has played this year, and he has played lights out. But I keep saying with Justin Fields, I want to see how he plays in this college football playoff, just because he's going to have a huge chance to redeem himself. And I think if he goes out and plays well against Clemson, there's going to be a bunch of people that get back into his corner.
And what is the Zach Wilson thing? Because something I'm worried of, but it happens every draft season, is a player seemingly comes out of nowhere. Someone we didn't – like Trevor Lawrence, we all knew he was really good, and he was a future number 1 pick. Like Zach Wilson, that wasn't the case. We, at least from my perspective, from just the outside looking in, it didn't seem like Zach Wilson was a guy everybody's been talking about for years. He seemingly has come out of nowhere. And then also, again, being at the college of BYU, we'll talk about some other quarterbacks and where they play and how that factors in. But what is the evaluation of a guy that kind of comes out of nowhere, and how do you kind of evaluate that as a draft analyst?
Well, I think the thing that a lot of people don't
really realize about quarterback development is that it really can come out of nowhere. You don't really know when a quarterback when that light is going to turn on for him, and when he's essentially going to understand everything that's happening in front of him. And we saw it with Joe Burrow last year. Nobody expected Joe Burrow to have that type of season, putting up those video game-like numbers. But it was just a matter of everything just coming together, working in unison. and then in sequential order of how just the steps in his development was just able to take off. And we saw how well he was able to play last year. And I think it's a similar situation with Zach Wilson, of where everything was just starting to click for him. But Zach just wasn't healthy last year. A lot of people don't know that he had surgery on his thumb, his throwing thumb, his right hand, and then his shoulder as well. He had a torn labrum coming into last year as well. So it's just a matter of him being healthy and then just everything coming together for him. But I think he's legit. He's a legit prospect. You see all the games that he has played in this year, the ball just jumps out of his hand very violently. He's very decisive, and then he has the mobility required to really enter and play and make plays outside of structure. So I think both him and Fields are legit type of prospects, but it's just a matter of which flavor floats your boat a little bit better than the other. So right now, I still have Justin Fields ahead of Zach Wilson, but I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if there's a lot of respected draft analysts that end up having Wilson ahead of Fields.
Well, you said, what's your flavor? Well, there's a fourth flavor in the mix for people. That's Trey Lance. Now, competition questions arise, and also it's easy to Monday morning quarterback here, excuse the pun, when you're looking at it. But Trey Lance plays in the one game this year, and he looked so great last year. And then this one game, of course, we're going to overanalyze because that's the only game that we saw this year, and he struggled a bit. So how can you possibly evaluate Trey Lance, especially in what is perceived to be a very rich quarterback class?
And it's tough just because a lot of people don't really understand how
important sample size is for quarterbacks. And I like to bring up this stat a lot. And there's only been, I believe, 4 quarterbacks in history that have went on to become first-round picks after starting in only one season, or what is considered 15 career games. And it was Mark Sanchez, Dwayne Haskins, Cam Newton, and then Mitchell Trubisky. So obviously a mixed bag of how their careers actually turned out. And I think Trey Lance is in a similar situation. I don't really count the game that he started this year just because, I mean, there's not a whole lot of tape to go off of as far as just from that one game. So I don't think the needle should have really been moved in either direction just based on how he performed in that game. And it was an up and down performance. And there's going to be different viewpoints of how people saw the game just because it was the first time we saw him turn the football over in his entire career. That's just a phenomenal feat for him to not throw any interceptions during his freshman season. Anytime a player goes out and does that and goes 16-0 and then wins a national championship on the FCS level as a redshirt freshman, scouts are going to come calling for that. But as far as the traits that he has, I think they're off the charts. As far as his size, he has the big time size that you're looking for. He has the arm that you're looking for. But it's just a matter of him working through some progression things. I think those are some of the things that I think he needs to improve upon. But that just comes with reps. And as he continues to grow and it gets better on the NFL level, now I think he's a player that probably needs to sit his first year. I don't think he's going to be ready coming into the league as a rookie. I think similar to what he did when he got to North Dakota State, he needs to have that redshirt year, and then I think he'll be ready to go during year 2.
Jordan, as a former quarterback, does it make it easier, harder as you're evaluating quarterbacks? I imagine for a man, when you're looking at your own craft, there's a bit more. You've got even a more refined look at it that you maybe judge it even harsher. Some people have kind of made kind of the comparison, like if you're coaching your son, you're going to coach him even harder because it's your son if he was on your football team, to the same thing from position to position. Is that how you view it?
Yeah, and it's just seeing the game from different lenses.
And, just being in the pocket, being able to throw from different platforms, and then actually seeing the game on the college level, I can kind of put myself inside the helmet of what these guys particularly are seeing, whether it's from a progression standpoint, some of the checks that they're making at the line of scrimmage, and just why they did or didn't do certain things. So it definitely helps playing the position just because you're able to see it from a different viewpoint. And it's kind of hard to explain, especially for people that never had the experience of being back there and just experiencing it on the certain level. So I think with Trey, though, I think it's going to be really interesting to see exactly who's high on him and then who's low on him, just because of the limited amount of tape that we have on him.
We're speaking with the franchise quarterback for the Draft Network, Jordan Reid, here on the program. And another option, if the Jets don't go quarterback, is potentially BPA. That's a term a lot of people like to use. And that player, if we're looking at the Draft Network big board, would be Penei Sewell, offensive tackle out of Oregon. Now, I struggle with this one because on one hand, of course, you want the best possible offensive line you can have, and that would be great. And you talked earlier about those premium positions. The Jets drafted your boy, Mekhi Becton. You sung his sweet praises last year, and you nailed that, by the way. So you should pat yourself on the back as often as possible in this business where we get so many misses and people tweet at us about what we miss and get wrong. You should always go, yeah, Mekhi Becton, that one wasn't too bad. But nonetheless, as we're looking at this for BPA, if you're Joe Douglas, do you struggle at all or hesitate at all is probably the better word to draft Penei Sewell knowing he'll be a right tackle? Does that frustrate the player and Sewell is like, oh man, I'm going to be a right tackle? Or if you flip him and Mekhi Becton will look pretty good at left tackle? Like, I'm just looking at all the potential ripple effects. So the great thing is having two offensive tackles in Madden, that's great. They look phenomenal. But the person, kind of how each of them perceive them coming in, the personality, I mean, you got to kind of, factor that in as well. Should there be any hesitation in here if they decide that Sewell is the guy?
It would be for me, and I say this all the time
when I'm talking to fans or on a podcast of teams that are very early in the draft. Nothing matters in a rebuild until you get the quarterback position stabilized. And I think until the Jets get the quarterback position stabilized, they have to keep taking swings at it. And I keep referencing Sam Darnold and the fifth-year option potentially coming up with the decision. With that, I just think the good or the bad outweighs the good with that, with me taking a quarterback at number 2 overall as opposed to, and the best way I can put this is that I think the drop off between Penei Sewell and then the next tackle in the draft is much smaller than the top 6 quarterbacks at the top of the draft, whether it's a Trevor Lawrence or Zach Wilson or Justin Fields or Kyle Trask or Mac Jones or Trey Lance. I just want to get my quarterback at that number 2 overall spot as opposed to waiting maybe later on in the draft to taking a quarterback as opposed to taking a Penei Sewell at the top and then trying to fixate another position. And basically what I'm trying to say is that you can get a tackle at whatever the Seahawks pick ends up being, or even at the top of the second round, just because this is a very deep offensive tackle class. And I just like the combination of getting a Zach Wilson or a Justin Fields combined with, let's say, Elijah Vera Tucker or somebody like a Jalen Mayfield from Michigan, as opposed to a Penei Sewell, and then taking a cornerback or an edge rusher or one of those other premium positions, or if you wait until the later parts of the first round to take a Kyle Trask or a Mac Jones. I just like the combination of getting my guy, the quarterback at number 2 overall, and then combining him with an offensive tackle to play opposite of Mekhi Becton. I just like that predicament a little bit better than some of the other options. And then, of course, you face the other conundrum of what you talked about of Penei Sewell, who's never played right tackle before, so he has to learn an entirely new position. And then me personally, I'm not going to mess with Mekhi Becton just because I know he's a hit at left tackle. And I'm not a big fan of shuffling offensive linemen just because it's very difficult to move to another position, especially on the fly like that. And I know was probably going to end up being a future all-pro player at left tackle already. I don't want to create another hole of flipping 2 players at certain positions because I don't know what Penei Sewell is going to be at the next level at left tackle. So that's a question mark. And then let's say if I move back to right tackle, I don't know what he's going to be at right tackle. So essentially, you're creating 2 holes.
Yeah, and here's the thing. So let's go quarterback here, because again, here's the thing. I feel if the Jets front office, Joe Douglas and whoever the next head coach is, because it seems like that's going to happen, thank God. But whoever comes in there, they're probably going to want a quarterback to be able to reset the thing. If they make that decision, if they believe there's a franchise quarterback in this class, I don't think they should play around and try to trade back. They take whoever they believe is that franchise quarterback at 2. But the thing that potentially complicates it for me, if there's no clear-cut number 2 quarterback, and you don't want to be the Bears. You don't want to be Mitchell Trubisky, Mahomes, Watson, Trubisky. Let's try out the Trubisky thing, and then Mahomes and Watson. The Bears get made fun of all the time about swinging and missing at that position, which is brutal. But at the same time, if you don't step up to the plate, if you don't swing the bat, you can't hit it. So I just kind of struggle with that as a Jets fan. Who is QB2? Who is the pick? Who should be the quarterback if they're going to go at that direction with the 2nd overall pick?
For me, right now, it's just a toss-up between Justin Fields and Zach Wilson. I really want to wait to see how Fields plays in the college football playoff, just because I have not liked some of the things that I've seen on tape in the past couple of weeks against Northwestern and then Indiana, which, I mean, it's something to add to his draft portfolio. But as you see all the time, whether it's the media or even some well-respected draft analysts, a lot of people weigh too much on those bad games, and they really forget about some of the good moments and then some of the good traits that they do have. So I want to dive back into really the Northwestern and then the Indiana game to see what happened in those games, and then also how he plays against Clemson, which is going to be a very well-respected opponent, which is one he played really well against last year. So I want to see how he plays against these opponents. And then I already know what Zach Wilson is. He's not going to play another game this year. So I'm pretty much done with putting his portfolio together.
All right, let's look at this, because this is a question you've asked out on Twitter before, and people should follow you on Twitter. You're a great follow. You kind of said, "Ah, man, judging the NFL head coaching openings that exist right now with Atlanta, Houston, Detroit, there's going to be more. The Jets are expected to join that group. There will be others. Where do the Jets fit into the mix? Because, Jet fans can sometimes be biased on how they perceive it to be. They have 18 draft picks over the next 2 years, including 4 first-round picks. Again, also over that same time span in the next 4 years. Houston has no picks, but they also got some guy named Deshaun Watson who's pretty good. So, again, how do you judge that? Quite frankly, just how desirable is this Jets job, or where does it rank among the openings that already exist right now?
Well, I will say losing the number 1 overall pick and then the shot at Trevor Lawrence does knock it down a little bit. But the great thing about the Jets job is that you have a bunch of cap room upcoming. You have plenty of draft picks. And then I think you're going to have some roster flexibility upcoming here too. And I'm a person that loves challenges. I love seeing all the puzzle pieces come together. So I would love the challenge of putting the Jets back together, just because I think it's a fan base that really is deserving of a contender, just because it's been so long since they've had an actual contender. But you get to walk into a situation where you have pretty much 3 first-round picks that I like to say. You have the draft pick at the top of the second round, which I like to call as the money zone. Anytime you're in the top 40 picks, I really call them first-round picks, just because you have the guys that really slip for whatever reason, whether it's injuries or red flags or things of that nature. So they really have 3 first-round picks, in my opinion, not counting the 50-year option for the second-round pick, obviously. But you have a chance to really, really rebuild this roster really fast, especially if you want to take the quarterback at number 2 overall. We'll see what Joe Douglas does end up doing, but I think he's a very, very, very well-respected NFL evaluator. We see he definitely has a clear eye of talent. So the Jets are in really good hands. But as far as where it ranks, I think it probably would be in the middle tier of the jobs. Obviously, Jacksonville is probably the most appealing right now. Anytime you have a chance at what is pretty much labeled as a generational quarterback, you have 11 draft picks and then the most estimated cap room in the league coming into the year. That's going to be a very appealing job. I think a lot of people aren't huge fans of the Texans job, but I think anytime you have a franchise quarterback who's pretty much at his peak and then only 25 years old, I think that is very appealing with Deshaun Watson. And everybody like to bring up the draft picks or lack thereof that they have, but I think it's only a 1-year thing. Next year in 2022, they're going to have all the draft picks back. So it's pretty much a mulligan for this year. You just have to weather the storm of getting through this year, and then you have the chance to rebuild that roster after that. I think after that, Atlanta is pretty appealing just because of the offensive pieces that they already have in place. I think Matt Ryan is probably going to maintain a starting job there for 1 or 2 more years, just because of the high cap number that he would have, the dead cap number it would cost to get rid of him. You have Julio Jones and then Calvin Ridley, who's probably going to turn into a star here over the next few years. He's shown some things that is really positive and in his corner. So I think it's probably that middle tier. It's not in that bottom dweller tier like Detroit. I think Detroit is a super underwhelming job, and there's going to be some others that probably open up here soon that's going to be underwhelming as well. So I think it's a middle tier job, but for people that love challenges like myself, I think it would be a job I would love to take head on. But obviously, I'm not in the running for the job. There's going to be some people that really don't like the media pressure from the Jets as well. There's just some people that aren't willing to take on those challenges. So I would label it as a middle tier job.
I feel like I already know the answer to this question based on how you answered another question, but nonetheless, I'll ask it. We got a social question when fans heard that you were coming on, and the question is: if you're the Jets and you have some of those picks, whether the late Seattle one or an early Jets 2, would you potentially package either of those to move up in the draft? You draft the QB, let's just say number 2. And then with those other picks, you could move up and get another top 15 player on your board. Would that be worth it for you? Or, again, you'd kind of go quantity over the quality there?
Yeah, I would go quantity over quality. I just don't think the Jets are in a situation of where they need to trade up right now. I think they're in a situation of where they just need to stockpile talent. So even with that Seattle pick, if they trade back a couple spots to get an extra day 2 pick, I think that would be really great, just because they're in a position of where they not only need premium positions, but they lack depth overall on the roster as well. So I think I would be very hesitant about trading up, just because as far as the premium positions right now, there really isn't a whole bunch of guys that I would just be in a hurry to trade up for, honestly, just because I think the discrepancy between a lot of those positions really isn't that great. I think the only huge discrepancy is Trevor Lawrence from the next quarterback. But from an offensive tackle standpoint, I really wouldn't be pressed to trade up for any of these guys. Cornerback is the same way. I think the top tier guys, they're really in the same bubble
are really in the same type of box together as far as their talent. And then edge rusher, I don't think there's a Myles Garrett or a Joey Bosa or anybody like that at the top of the draft that I would be so pressed to trade up for. So I think the Jets are just in a situation where they need to take a quantity over quality approach right now.
Last one before we get you out of here, Jordan, and it's simply this. For the Jets, for where they're standing here with the 2021 NFL Draft coming up, a position that a lot of Jet fans are looking at is wide receiver. Denzel Mims has been a very pleasant surprise coming out of the second round, but they're still missing that alpha, that number one. And there are some tantalizing guys, obviously, with Jamar Chase and Devonta Smith and others. But you talked about some of the kind of the gaps and drop-offs with positional value. What is that for wide receiver, whether it's the Seattle pick, whether it's early in the second round like we saw the Bengals do last year, grabbing T. Higgins, like one of those kind of guys? Is that it? Or even still, you could trade back with that Seattle pick and still get one of those game-changing wide receivers?
Yeah, I don't think they need to be pressed with getting one of these,
like you said, alpha types, just because we've seen with wide receivers, you can find them all over the place. And I know everybody's so pressed to get their guy in the first round, but similar to last year, this is a very deep wide receiver class. And I think there's three at the top that everybody loves to talk about, similar to last year when we talked about Judy, Ruggs, and Lamb. I think it's going to be similar with Chase, Waddle, and then Smith. But after that, there's not a significant drop off at all. And we saw in the second tier last year, in the first round, where we saw guys like Justin Jefferson go in the 20s. Brandon Ayuk is another example of a player that went in the first round, and still we saw the success that he was able to have with the 49ers. So if the Jets wanted to get like a Terrace Marshall from LSU with that second round pick, a Chris Olave from Ohio State is another guy that definitely could be intriguing. And even if they wanted to wait a little bit later, Amon-Ra St. Brown from USC is another player that is really intriguing. Rashad Bateman is another that definitely could go at the top of the second round that's been commonly placed with the Jets in that late first round and early second round selection as well. So I don't think they need to be pressed with trading up for any of these guys. I think Joe Douglas has shown a really good feel with getting a guy like Denzel Mims of how he can engage the talent of wide receivers, and he does need to be pressed to take one early.
Jordan, I want to thank you so much for joining us. It's awesome. You're the best. And again, hopefully, the Jets can get half the franchise quarterback you are with the second overall pick. I think they'll be in a good spot. Thanks, brother.
No problem. Thanks as always, Paul.